Welcome, everybody, to AB Live, and I hope you enjoyed that visual introduction with famous and impactful Gnostic priestesses, witches, and thinkers. And that's certainly part of the theme today. Watching these amazing women in the first and second century who had ideas that were just game changing, perhaps the foundation of alchemy, foundation of Gnosticism, and a lot of Christian thought. It's pretty impressive. It makes me think, well, are we any better today? And for some reason, my gut tells me we are not any closer to the goddess than we were 2,000 years ago. And it seems the archons are just getting started, but we got to keep fighting for these things. So very excited. Tonight, we will be discussing a lot of Mary, a lot of esoteric Egypt, and a lot of Kundalini Gnosis or energy. It's gonna be, it's gonna be eye-opening, or as I often say, prepare to have your mind expanded and reality disbanded. And I must say that this is not an original one. That quote actually appears in the Rocky Horror Show. So, but it just sounded good, and I stole it. So, with us today, we have my friend and great scholar, Dr. Joanna Kujawa. Joanna, how are you here in the desert of the real?
I am good. I'm good and happy to share my new explorations after the other goddess, And I'm also a bit nervous because, I actually haven't discussed it really before, just in one workshop with a very small group of people, some of the ideas, right? So I'm just kind of entering a new territory. So, but it's quite interesting because it's been nearly a year since the other goddess was published, and you were the first one to interview me on the book. before even it was, released. And it was also, I was very nervous as well, right? Because it was my first interview on the book, and then
Right,
I can talk about the book. But now it's the first, like, a real interview about the new stuff. So I'm thinking, you know, because I don't have this book written yet, I will just probably start writing it. So I just still kind of wonder how it is organized, right? So be kind, right? Because it's new for me too.
oh, that's okay. That's okay. Well, no, it's great that this research it's coming. It's coming from someplace, so you got to lean on it. I mean, I didn't even think of the Elvis book really in an interview. I forget who it was, and somebody I was like yapping, and they're like, "Just write the damn book." Oh, okay. So it's it, it's a labyrinth. As Krishnamurti said, "Truth is a pathless land," and I always say, "Gnosis is a pathless labyrinth." Who
Yeah,
knows? A
yeah,
lot of
yeah.
minotaurs too. So, but with us too, we have our favorite minotaur, a Taurus too, and that is the Moondog Vance. Vance, how are you doing?
Oh, pretty good. Glad to be hanging out with you guys. And hey, I saw one of them. Miriam looked like Elizabeth Montgomery. They
They're
all
all
Yeah.
had
gorgeous. They're all
yeah,
gorgeous. I
they
love
had great
them.
makeup in those days too. I noticed.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did. No, I don't even know where I get it. I think Joanna and I have this like guilty pleasure of scouring the internet for cool graphics, fantasy graphics to represent this and that. I've been leaning a little on AI here, but sometimes it's more fun to hunt for them. So,
Oh, they were
like
great. Yeah,
the
enjoyed them.
thumbnail for this one is actually AI generated. The
Oh, wow.
woman that you see. So the
It's
times have
great.
changed. Times are always changing. Well, awesome. Well, for those of you in the chat room, I see Mr. Chester. He's saying, well, why don't we say the message and you can, let's see. Oh, you already did that. There's Chester. Don't worry, Chester, because Joanna is actually mourning where you are, right?
That's right. It's just after 11 a.m.
So it's Good Friday already.
Yeah, it's Good Friday. Yeah.
All right. So yeah, we still have 48 hours before Mary meets Jesus on the road to Emmaus. So
Ah.
a lot of things going. And well, let's talk any housekeeping. I'll worry about that later. Tomorrow we do have an AB live with Jerry Morzinski. It was the only time he was able to do it, so I scheduled it. We will be doing our sequel of Arconic Mind Parasites Overdue. And it was just a complete coincidence that when I scheduled, I didn't know, but we're doing it right at 3 p.m. on Good Friday when Jesus was crucified. So perfect time because that's when the Archons thought they'd won, right? They got the guy, they crucified the logos, Sophia was just crying. It was just over, but the powers of good won, at least in that story. So it'll be a good time. So check us out tomorrow. And then I'll have some other stuff as we go. For tonight and moving on, if you have any questions, please super chat them and we'll go from there. So, Joanna, tell us about this research. Now, is this research that you had before the other goddess, or is this stuff that's been sort of being downloaded?
No, no, that's so scary, and because I don't know if you remember, I was saying I am done. I just want to do spiritual practice now, and I was doing really well because, and when I was promoting the other goddess, lots of energy goes out. I loved it. I loved doing it, because I love connecting with people, but, it's just energy going out. And I think I have to really now, like, omit, right? Like, get within. And then, things started to come back at me, and I will explain how. And now I think I have to write another book, but maybe not right away. I still need a bit of a break. But I got excited, so I thought, like, maybe I will share some things that are going on. But as I said, they are still quite new for me. So uh, actually, I would say that, it starts with the other goddess. So if we can go with the first slide, if you have it available, because I'm just feeling a little bit techno dumb at the
All
moment.
right, I will put it on. Let's see.
Just as a form of introduction before I move to the new stuff, completely new stuff.
Of
Yes.
course.
this is in the Other Goddess in part 2. I talk about, when I was in Jerusalem and I went to the Russian Orthodox Church of Saint Mary Magdalene. I saw her, there standing with her head extended and with an egg. And I got this idea that, she was actually sharing secrets to higher consciousness with us. And I connected her with other goddesses from Nimna, Inanna, Isis, and so on, right? So we can get rid of this PowerPoint slide, and we can so this is just from the Other Goddess. It's in part 2. And then
do you want to move to the next slide or just
let's leave it for now, because I'll just give a background to this. And in there I also just kind of started to discuss, is it possible for Mary Magdalene that she went to Egypt, right? Because in popular folklore, and especially popularized by Margaret Starbird, she went to France. And also there are some sources, especially from 10th century on, that there is a long-standing tradition in France. But even if this tradition is true, according to this tradition, she didn't go to France until 15 years after the crucifixion. So I hypothesize, that she went to Alexandria, right? Because what a place to be. And in the Other Goddess, I explain why it actually makes sense, and that there is some kind of, it's actually not just a fantasy, right? And so I just explored a little bit of Egypt, because the whole book was really about, Tantra and Mary Magdalene and goddesses of Eros and secret knowledge. And I thought I was kind of done with this, right? And at the end of the second part, I got a kind of vision of Mary Magdalene in Alexandria, which was a little bit of a download, kind of area of imaginal, it was more of a vision than imagination. And, I was very happy with this. And then somebody put me into touch with people from the magical Egypt. So I don't know if you're familiar with them. So this is Chance Gardner and Vanessa McNeil, who created the series Magical Egypt. Mm-hmm. And they have quite a big cult following. And because we were told that we are basically looking to the same things, right? So Kundalini energy, right? Except that they are looking into Kundalini energy in Egypt. So I thought, wow, right? So immediately we got in touch with each other, and I did an interview with him, I did an interview with them, and also then I did a workshop on Mary Magdalene and Esoteric Egypt. So I will first, the reason why, I want to talk about it, because I want to give them credit, because I would not think about much about Kundalini in Egypt. In the Other Goddess, I just said that, it says that Nefertiti and Akhenaten were using it, and also that the earlier pharaoh woman Hatshepsut, which I think was about 75 years or so. I don't want to make a mistake now, was using some kind of form of energy, right? Sexual energy. And so I just kind of mentioned this. And then they did an extensive work on Kundalini energy in Egypt. So, but even more importantly, when we look at Egypt, there's lots of controversy about Egypt, right? Between the classical Egyptologists, which are from academia, and alternative researchers who say that Egypt is actually, the civilization is much, much older, right? So in Magical Egypt, they argue the same. They follow the book, Anthony West, Serpent in the Sky, which is a famous book that they just introduced me to, and also research of a 19th century Egyptologist, de Lubitsch, French Egyptologist. And they all claim that Egyptian civilization actually didn't progress. Like in the West, we have this idea that also, and we are like the, top of, because we're so smart, right? When they argue that actually Egyptian civilization was, all we know, it was intact at its peak, at its very beginning.
Wow.
And so that's why they think that's why all of this theories about Atlantis, whether it existed or not, because, they were like at their peak, at the very beginning. And in fact, that when you look at the Egyptian civilization, they started to decline as the time went on, and they started to forget their mysteries and so on. And I think this is really important to remember, because even when I was preparing for the Other Goddess, I read Lachman's book on Hermes, right? The Fra is great. And there, he says, like everybody, I love the book, by the way, is, that Hermes is actually a combination of Greek Hermes and God Thoth and so on. When I think that if we rewind the history, that this is actually much more legitimate, right? That this is what the Greeks later added on, to certain things. So, so when we look at, how the time during which the Gospel of Mary Magdalene was written in Egypt, but this we have to look at the depth of the tradition, and actually these traditions were already degrading. But both Hermetics, like talking about Hermes, or Gnostics, had a certain preoccupation with a serpent, right? So, and we can talk about it. And that serpent was not bad, like in the Bible, that serpent is actually expression of good energy. So I just wanted to set it up this way. And also they argue, and this is the Lubitsch, I think, work primarily, is that both the temples in ancient Egypt were actually representation of human body with the movement of the Kundalini energy. Okay. And if you just can go to I think it's the next slide, or maybe third slide.
Sure. Before we go on, some of the audience might not know, when you're saying Kundalini energy, what are you saying?
Okay, so Kundalini energy, sorry, yes, you have to interrupt me, because once I'm into something, I just make assumptions, which is stupid. So Kundalini energy is actually, taken from esoteric Hinduism. We know it from esoteric Hinduism, and especially tantric teachings, but not necessarily, which they believe it is the spiritual force, energetic force within our body that, awakens during a spiritual awakening. Right, and it's stored at the bottom. Normally, stored as a coiled serpent. It's represented as a serpent. That's why I was talking about the serpent at the bottom of our spine. And as it is awakens, it goes up, up, up along different energy centers until it explodes at the top of our head, and then we are one with cosmic consciousness. Right, if we unblock these things, right. So this is Kundalini energy. So this is this kind of latent spiritual energy represented as a serpent in esoteric Hinduism. And, magical Egypt people, the Lubitsch and Anthony West, argue that there are lots of representations of a serpent, which is upright serpent, that are actual representation in Egyptian temples that actually are representations, according to them, of Kundalini energy, because they're represented in the same way. Because awakened Kundalini is upright, straight. When unawakened is coiled, and they are always talking, when they're talking about mysteries of Osiris and Isis, the serpent is always awakened, which is, quite interesting, and I think it's not a coincidence, So, so this is what Kundalini energy is, just to say.
And
so,
does it have to go through the chakras, or it doesn't?
Yeah, so that's why because I don't want to go into Hindu terminology if people are not maybe familiar with that. But when I said energetic centers, there are chakras, right? Because chakras are energetic centers. But there are also kind of blockages in our energetic body, so to speak, where all kinds of, and this is what actually Mary Magdalene in her gospel talks about, I'll get into it, that, that are blocks. Because there are energy centers, but if it's blocked, the energy, the serpent with its head cannot kind of break through this, right? So then we have to help it, or it torments us in a way, like, because it brings up the old shit all the time, like, why does it happen to me? Well, because you don't let it go, that's why it happens to you, until you let it go, then, the Kundalini can move, or the serpent can move, and, and then there's another block, right? So this is what it is. So I hope it helps.
No, it does help, and of course, both Jeff Kripal and Tobias Churton would agree with you. Two brilliant scholars would agree with you, and you're expanding more because Jeff spends like a small chapter. Tobias spends a few paragraphs, but both are definitely so. It's
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
you're taking the baton to some great places for sure.
So this is very interesting. So if you can, I think it's slide 3, which says Hathor.
Yeah. So I'm doing these slides wrong. What am I doing? I have lost my powers, my Kundalini powers. No, okay. Slide 2. All right.
Plug it in. Next one.
Next one. All right.
Okay, so for example, when I'm borrowing it from Chance Gardner of Magical Egypt. So for example, even he says, even a regular Egyptologists, the academics notice, isn't it interesting that Hathor is represented like women's uterus?
Right.
Okay, and they have like endless examples from the temples, even like the plan of a temple which looks like a human body with a channel for Kundalini, for the serpent. So I think that this is quite interesting, as you see. So we can get rid of this if you. I just wanted for people to see that this is what we are claiming. And also from an esoteric Hinduism point of view, it is very interesting because, of course, Kundalini awakening often starts with a woman. So I discuss it in Via the Goddess, right? So it's interesting that Hathor, the goddess of fertility, is represented actually as uterus, and this is when the movement of Kundalini actually starts at the bottom of the spine and the bottom of our body. So this is kind of interesting, right? And a little bit mind-blowing. And they have, in their series, they have endless examples of this, And the reason why I'm talking about it, because, and if you can just show a second slide for a moment.
Sure.
Because I do believe, the second one, with Gospel of Mary Magdalene. So this is actually a papyrus, part of a papyrus of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, right? And it was found in 1896 in Akhmin, in the city of Akhmin. And I want us to remember this because it is important, in Egypt, right? So that's why it's Akhmin. So, and it was used to be called Panopolis, Greek name, after Alexander the Great. So it's a city of Akhmin. And it is very important because, of course, Akhmin is a city in Egypt. And I think we cannot look at the Gospel of Mary Magdalene and disregard the fact that it was found in Egypt and not in Syria or not in Israel, right? So if we can just get rid of the slide. Thank you for being so helpful. Because you also see that it's only partial, because I'll discuss it in a moment. Mm-hmm. So the thesis that I'm making in our conversation here, and I hope, in my next book, it is that actually the Gospel of Mary Magdalene is teaching the mysteries of ascension the same way that, all the temples and gods and goddesses in ancient Egypt, according to this research, by these people that I mentioned before, represent ascension of the soul through the movement of the Kundalini. Mm-hmm. Okay? Mm-hmm. Does it sound wild? Okay, or do I have to repeat it? No. So maybe it is wild, but it's still very interesting, right? So that's why I think that we have to look into the fact that the Gospel of Mary Magdalene was found in Akhmin, which is in Egypt. And that's why I wanted to bring up this other alternative visions of Egypt and the fact that, all the representations of gods and the representations of the temple actually deal with the mysteries of ascension, which is, focused on Isis and Osiris in it, right? And also Horus, which represents something else, which is awakened Kundalini. So, but we don't want to talk about it too much because I actually want to, go back to the Gospel of Mary Magdalene because I think this is what we want to focus. So if you could go to a next slide, there's a map there. And anyway, interrupt me if something is not clear or I get carried away again.
No, it's good. But Vance, what about from your vantage point in the Kundalini? The snakes and ladders, how does it look?
I know what Joanna's saying. I was wondering what the relationship between India and Egypt is, if there was a cross-pollination or if the Egyptians, took that concept, independently.
That's great. That's a great question. But I think because, we believe that and I concur, the alternative theories that Egypt, doesn't matter how you look at it, it looks best at the beginning and it declines, the closer it gets to the Roman times and so on. It is that they both come from an earlier civilization.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that one necessarily borrowed from the other, but it was disseminated from somewhere. And that's a very interesting question: who and what started all of this, right? But they had this ability to start a civilization, at its peak, right? So basically, it looks like some civilization just moved there and did everything they could, started up, and then we kind of slowly ruined it. Another another interesting thing from magical Egypt is that, I don't know what the source of it is, but they said that the Romans couldn't conquer Egypt until they stole Egyptian magic, which
Really?
means they stole the scrolls, sacred scrolls about ascension of the soul, and only then they realized that the power of Egypt lies in its esoteric teachings. You see, so it's quite interesting that and only until they
Yeah.
stole the magic they were able to conquer them. So if we could go to the slide about the map.
All right. After
And
the
as I said to
map.
anybody who listens, I'm just organizing my thinking about it. Okay, fantastic. So you see that it's a little bit too small now. So Nag Hammadi, Thebes. Oh yes, this one. So on this one, it's the city of Akhmin. You see, it is already called in Upper Egypt. So it's Akhmin, I think. It's
Mm-hmm.
Akhmin here. So Akhmin is here. So this is where the papyrus was found in 1896. Okay. So the papyrus was found in 1896, and then it was bought by another just another city that we need to know. It's here a little bit to the north, and on the other side of the Nile is Osirinkus, I think.
All right.
So we can just get rid of this slide, and I will tell you why it's important. Because the papyrus of Mary Magdalene was found in 1896 and was sold to a German collector, Reinhardt, I think his name was. And it was not translated for ages and ages. Okay, and it's normally called the Berlin manuscript.
Right.
And because it was stored there. And then, when I think the first scholar that was looking at it, just let me to check the notes. My notes here was, I think his name was Tillich, I think, but I would just skip this because I just lost my notes somewhere for a moment. Just a moment. No, I have it here somewhere. Schmidt, I'm sorry, Schmidt, of course. Schmidt, by Schmidt. So he said that it was written in Sahidic Coptic, and he said it's from 1400s. Okay, so it's from 400 early 5th century, 400 something. And then, but there was another piece found in this other city, Oxyrhynchus, right? Which was written in Greek, because there are all kinds of mistakes and borrowings, the first one, so I thought there must be an earlier version. And this one was dated to late 1st or early 2nd century. So there is a discussion how old it is, but some of them argue that maybe it is written in the sometime between 90 or 150 of Common Era, So that's why I say, because we have actually two major foundings there, right? So this
But they're both the same, right? They don't have the middle part missing, where we
unfortunately
the archons, the kind of the battle scene.
Yeah, in fact, what we have, it's a combination of both.
Okay, so what we have and for the audience, they might, so you don't make a mistake. The Gospel of Mary is not found in the Nag Hammadi library, even when they'll include it, but it's never part of the Nag Hammadi library.
That's right. So because in Nag Hammadi 1945, right? So it is 1896. Although sometimes dating is changing, but 1896 is probably the most correct date. So we have these two parts, and that's why I showed this PowerPoint on the PowerPoint. But it's lots of parts are missing, and I believe that, and it's called the other one is called the Ryland Papyrus. So the text that we have of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene is a combination of these two, right? And they think that actually there must be an even earlier version for linguistic reasons, but we are not in possession of that. Okay. So any questions so far before we get actually to the Gospel of Mary Magdalene?
No, I think yeah, thanks for the super chat, Chester. Thanks for your support. No, this is definitely very, so far so good, so clear.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just digress for a moment that, reading the Gospel of Mary Magdalene is not easy because it is an esoteric and mystical text. So it is not like reading the Bible, don't sleep with your neighbor's wife, or, don't steal stuff. It is, highly interpretive, right? So actually, when I started to study esoteric Hinduism in 2004, and in 2005, I started to study Gospel of Mary Magdalene, and now I'm kind of figuring it out. Okay, so it's 17 years, and and it's just my interpretation. The best translation and interpretation that I found is by Jean-Yves Leloup, and I'm kind of building on him. However, I think that, and I feel really terrible because this guy is a spiritual genius, and he translated it from Coptic and so on. So it's like I am like the midget on the shoulders of a giant, right? So I understand this. However, because what Jean-Yves Leloup is doing, it is that he's looking at the Gospel of Mary Magdalene from a spiritual point of view, but Christian theology. And I think this is quite limiting because Christian theology came after, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, right? So the way I try to look at the Gospel of Mary Magdalene is, through Egyptian esoteric teachings, because it was found in Egypt. It must have been somehow influenced by what was going on in Egypt. And also, yeah, and also I found the correspondence between esoteric Egypts concerning Kundalini, especially, and so on, with esoteric Hinduism. So I'm going to use this kind of vocabulary. If it gets too complicated, please let me know. Okay. So if we could move to, actually, let's not move yet. So first of all, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene is divided into two parts, so to speak, mostly because of the missing parts. So page 1 to 6, goners, right? Like we don't know what's going on. It starts with page 7 with a very interesting question from Peter, not favorite of any Gnostics, right? Because he says, teacher, please tell us about the nature of the sin of the world. And the teacher, e.g. Jesus, he says, Peter, the sin as such does not exist. So this is something to, I'm really interested in, page 1 to 6, because the sin doesn't exist, so I love it. And he says, so he's probably talking about the original sin, sin of the world. He just says that there are consequences, and it will have a meaning when we move into part 2, consequences of our own actions. Okay, so if we make a decision or undertake an action according to a lower level of consciousness, it will have lower consequences. If we make a decision from a higher level of consciousness, then it will have good results. Neither is a sin. You make choices, but from which level of your evolutionary consciousness you're making this choice? Is it out of jealousy or it is out of generosity? I'm giving it. Right? Like an example. Is it out of hate or is it out of love? Right? Do you want to take or do you want to give something? Right? So this is he says that this is it, right? About the nature of a sin. Another question is sorry, I think I'm getting nervous because now I keep forgetting this. The question he asks is, Peter asks, should we add anything to the existing laws? Right? And Jesus says, no, don't go there, because then human beings will be even more bound. Yeah. Right? No more laws.
And he's never named Jesus. He's the Savior. He's Jesus, but for some reason they call him the Savior.
Yeah, the teacher. In here, they call him the teacher.
Oh, okay.
And the teacher says, in the Gospel of Mary, at least in the translations that I have, calling the teacher. But for example, in Gospel of Philip is the Savior, right?
Right.
So the teacher says, no more laws, because then you will be bound by other things, which I think is very relevant for our reality nowadays, right? Like, don't add any law, no more restrictions, please, right? No more restrictions, please, the teacher says. And he says, but and don't listen to the world telling you what is right, what is wrong. Go within to find the inner truth, which is the Gnosis, of course.
Right.
So don't let them, don't say the world is telling you, look here, look there, this is right, this is right. Don't go there. Look within. Don't listen to the voices of the world telling you what is right. You go within, and then you found my peace within you. Okay, so this is the Gnosis of the teacher from the first part of the Gospel of Mary, right? Then, so I like it. I don't know. I like freedom, and I like the whole sin thing being gone. So I think
Right.
rather right. I remember as a little girl going to church and, Father, I'm not worthy. I didn't do anything, but I'm not worthy. Right. So this is kind of clear. And then pages 11 to 14 are missing again. Right.
Right.
And what happens there, it is that we start actually, what happens, we know that Jesus is gone already. Right. And the disciples are approaching Mary and they say, Jesus, sister, we know that he loved you. Can you share the teachings with us that he had shared with you, but not with us?
Right.
So this is already, quite openly a statement that Jesus shared special esoteric teachings with Mary Magdalene, which he didn't share with the rest of the disciples, right? And she says, of course, she says, I would, Mary gathered them together and says, I will tell you what the teacher told me, right? And then she says that she saw Jesus in a vision, okay? In a vision, not in a person, in a vision. But what is this kind of vision? So it's not just a vision, like an imaginary vision, because when she sees Jesus, or the teacher, because I assume it's one and the same person, although I see the distinction you made, he says, Mary, you're blessed because you can see me, right? And she says, do I see you through my psyche or psyche, or do I see you through pneuma or pneuma? And he says, no, you see me in between, which is the nous, right? Which is the big nous, and we are going to discuss what it all means. And then the pages are missing. And then can we go to this major slide, because it's getting a bit intense. The next slide.
Boom, boom, boom.
Yes. And then she is, because some parts are missing, she is explaining to disciples that what is required for the ascension of the soul. So the soul is moving through what Leloup is calling 4 climates, or other translators called it other energies, 4 different energies, which I actually prefer now after some meditation and research, but energies, right? The first energy, we don't know because it is missing from the manuscript or from the papyri. But when we impose it on the, what the Platonists and also or Neoplatonist and also esoteric Hinduism, the first one is always wrong identification. Okay, so what is the wrong identification? Because it goes later with everything else. Wrong identification is what the Platonists called the soma. The soma, it is attachment to the matter, right? So I am this body. There is nothing but this physical existence and these 3 dimensions, right? So just as well, I don't know, get a mortgage, and die, or, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and if it doesn't appeal to you, because there's nothing else. But basically, it's an attachment to material goods, not because you're greedy even, but because there's nothing else. It is not within your field of perception that there is something non-material. Yes, do we understand?
Yes,
so basically, I would say that, for example, now with AI and so on, I think that they are trying to prolong, and I'm expressing a personal opinion, human life, through all kinds of technologies, which I think dangerous to the soul personally. I think this is because the assumption is that all there is soma, which means, just material existence, and you can extend this existence through some kind of technology, right? Smart technology. So I would say that, the obsession of AI and so on comes under the wrong identification, believing that you're just material and, if you want to live longer, then use some technology to live longer, that there's no progression beyond matter, right? So this is the first one. The second one is craving or desire. So what is craving and desire? So it's basically a sense of not enoughness, like I'm not enough, right? Like this kind of thing. And we all basically at a certain stage feel it. This sense is actually coming from our psyche. Okay, so talking about Neoplatonist psyche, which has correspondence, this kind of psyche, which is not understood by Platonists as soul, but rather as kind of clusters of desires, unfulfilled desires. And in Egyptian, so this is, I'm moving towards Egyptian terminology now. In Egyptian terminology, it's called died. Died. In esoteric Hinduism, it's called sushumna. Okay, but so if we can go for a moment to the next slide, because I want to say what's died, and we come back to this slide.
Sure, no problem.
You see, so the next slide actually shows diad. So in Egyptian paintings, Osiris is all, diad is called the spine of Osiris. Isn't it interesting? Because Kundalini is moving along your spine.
Right, yeah.
So these are explanations, as you see, like this is in different levels here, right? So it's called, diad is also called the spine of Osiris, right? So, and the Kundalini energy moves along your spine. So can we move back to the previous slide? Sure. This is just representations of the Osiris spine. So diad, or which is called also Osiris spine. So what is diad? Diad is like a channel in Egyptian, esoteric Egyptian teachings. It is like a channel, which is called sushumna in Hinduism, where all your unfulfilled desires and cravings are stored.
Oh, wow.
So they are not eternal, but they are immortal. What do you mean? So it means if you have an unfulfilled desire and you die, you are reborn with the same desire. Right? So for example, you wanted to be a famous writer, you died, well, now you're born again and you still want to be a famous writer, right? Also, some kind of more subtle things, or maybe even more negative, if there are any addictions or inclinations, you're already born with them, because you didn't resolve them in your previous life. So you carry them to a next life. They are stored in diad, which is the spine of Osiris. So that's why, it is important to drop it, she says, because, then you have to redo it, basically, all of this. So if I can just share.
And in Hinduism, what is it called again in Hinduism? Diad and Egypt.
Sushumna. Diad is in
Egyptian.
Egypt, and which is also, a diad is also spine of Osiris. It's sushumna. And in Hinduism, because we know more about Hinduism than Egyptian esoterica, unfortunately, at this stage, in sushumna are your vasanas. Vasanas are exactly these unfulfilled desires and also unfulfilled patterns. Like for me, probably I have some negative thinking patterns. Right, and I have to catch myself. I work recently, especially started to really heavily work on it, because if I don't catch it, I just go in that direction. So this is stored in my diad or in my sushumna. So right, because it is right. So so this is it. This is a craving, right? You want to be academic, or you want to be a famous writer. I'm just talking from my own past.
I want to ride one of those tricycles with giant wheels they did in the 20s.
That's right.
I can't help it. Yes.
Or you have some tendencies that are sabotaging you. They're also an addictions. They're also stored in sushumna. That's why it is really good. So when the Kundalini is moving, and I'm going to talk about it in a moment, it is bringing it up with great strength. So, for example, if you have cravings, if you're addicted to something, or you really start to be negative, like if you have a tendency like me, because it wants to be cleared. So it's not, this is not when you give in to these things, although it's extremely tempting, right? It is that it just wants to like throw it up. So you just have to sit with it until it just says, oh, I am pushing the buttons and she is not responding. And we said, okay, I give up.
I see.
Okay. So that's why when the energy is moving, it comes up stronger so we can get rid of this, right? So it's this, right? And that's why I said it can be dropped like a garment, she said, because, but you have to go through the process, right? Because it comes up. So it's diet or sushumna with vasanas.
But at the same time, these forces or these energies to ascend, they are personified as archons or stellar lords. That's what the Hermetists, the Egyptians do in the Gnostics. So
yes,
in a way, they are, wrong identification is an archon. It's a figure you
that's
have
right.
to
Because so this is actually, I'm going to look into it maybe another talk because I'm still looking into it. This one mostly, I will discuss it at the end, but this one mostly focuses on how we can get rid of them by internal work. By the movement of energies, right? And also in esoteric teachings, it's not only as above so below and as below so above, but it's also the world is as you see it. So that's why they also say be really careful what you're focusing on, because when whatever you focus on, okay, you magnify, right? So you give more, like archons, you give them more power by talking about them, So be careful.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, so be careful because they love that attention, right? So this is more about inner journey, I think. Although at the end I will say something because this is something very interesting at the end that I think points at the archons.
Sure.
So this is the second energy, right? So we have this diet or sushumna, diet in Egypt. This is where all unfulfilled desires are. So from a spiritual point of view, if I can just share, somebody would say that one of my spiritual teachers said, if you have a strong desire, either get rid of this, and if you can't get rid of this, do it. Because then it's shit again, over and over again, Do you
So it's
understand?
the corporations. Just do it, get it over
Yeah,
with.
just do it, because man, you have to get over this. Not everything can be suppressed, right?
No.
So that's funny, right? So this is the second one. The third one is ignorance, which is also understood as lack of discernment. So lack of discernment. So now you have, so actually this craving comes in, it's in psyche, right? Or in psyche, because it's stored in psyche is diet or sushumna. And then ignorance is basically lack of a connection with your own nous. Nous is this higher level of discernment. It's the higher wisdom, which it could be called also spiritual wisdom, or what I called also in the other goddess, it's a hook to which you actually connect with the cosmic consciousness, right? So this is, you connect to the source. You go beyond the archons, but you have like a hook that you can go, like you're underwater and you can go above the water. So this is your nous, right? So when we don't work on our nous, is basically it's a refusal of higher wisdom, right? And when we do, we have access to higher wisdom. So if I can give just an example, because it feels very abstract, probably from a personal life, is that, for example, I had this desire, which is part 2, right, in my psyche on diet, that I wanted to be either famous writer or excellent academic. So although I was with a spiritual teacher and my spiritual path was unfolding in front of me beautifully when I was initiated to the tradition, I was resisting it because I still wanted to be a famous writer.
Yeah.
That's high ignorance, right? So it means the desire, part 2, was so strong that I said, yes, I had nous, I had a connection to that, but she got became a professor, and so it is not knowing what really matters, right?
So all of this is also very much like the shadow, because the shadow is not only what you're ignoring, but what you need to look at, what you have. Shadow comes out when something you feel you haven't fulfilled. So
that's right. So, so this is the third one, and the fourth one. And I'm sorry, the fourth is I was editing too many times. It should be four here, which is strong latent feelings. So the fourth one is called rough, unfortunately, because it's actually very subtle, and it has 7 different kind of impersonifications, so to speak, but all of them relate, to strong latent feelings. So basically, what happens? It is like you already have a nous, right? You have an access to the source, which is basically anybody who has any spiritual practice, right? They have the nous, they develop the nous, and they are one with pneuma or pneuma, which is the fourth level, yeah. But what stops them, it is the last kind of latent feelings or concepts that are wrong. And they can be either inner concepts such as self-doubt, right? Like your mind is telling, who do you think you are? That you think you're not. So, your sister has a house, she has 2 children, her husband is an American industrialist. And who do you think you are, right? But also, and this is when you're talking about the archons, the reaction of lower energies at your ascent, judging and intimidating you. So, for example, saying exactly, how do you dare, murderer? This is how in the Gospel of Mary, they call you vagabond. Who do you think you are? It's actually quoting from the Gospel of Mary. You murderer, where do you think you're going? So this is a total assault from blatant concepts, but it's very violent assault, internal assault, but also from outside energies, which can maybe personified by archons or maybe even by your own family members,
Right, yeah.
Because it hurts when it's close to home, right? How do you dare, vagabond? Where do you think you're going, murderer, as your soul is ascending, right? Where do you think you're going, you, right? Who do you think you are? So they're judging and intimidating you. So I have this another wild theory because it has 7 elements, right? These latent feelings and concepts. When in the Bible, Jesus is exercising 7 demons, but he's actually freeing her from the last latent concepts and feelings that shift of unworthiness, so to speak. Do you know what I mean? Like, who do you think you are? You're a woman, you're like in her case, because right, she lived in a society that it was like a punishment really to be a woman, right? Especially if you're a woman spiritually inclined or smart, right? Or who? So he was, in my opinion, he was actually liberating him from the last latent concepts and feelings, and we all need it, right?
Yeah.
But the soul says, why are you judging me? I'm not judging you. The soul is by then completely cool. The ascension of the soul. Like, this is just like last latent things. And it's really interesting because what the soul is saying at the end is a design has been erased by the virtue of a higher design. She says, I am free now. The design, like Matrix, or I like to call it Patrix, Matrix, like patriarchy, not as I always repeat, not against men, but the system, the empire, right?
Right.
My attachment to the system or the system itself in my consciousness was erased by the virtue of a higher design, and it was replaced by a higher design, right? So basically, I'm not buying anymore into the lower energies, and I'm above the lower energies, whether they are internal or external, whether they are internal archons, which is like a tearing thoughts and concepts, of unworthiness, you sinner, right? Or they are external, externalized forces like the archons, right?
Right.
So she is above the soul, by the soul. She is above, the soul is above this now. So the design has been erased by the virtue of a higher design. But it also sounds to me, I still have to meditate upon this more, but it assumes almost like some external help,
Right.
which is at the moment not evident from the parts of the gospel that we actually have. But we have also obviously the story of Sophia, right, when Christ consciousness descends upon her, basically, right, and saves her from. So this is the gospel of Mary Magdalene, up to date for me. And once the soul, goes through the fourth and last obstacle, through the movement, like it could be a movement of Kundalini energy or movement of the soul, because it's really quite interesting, because I skipped something. So, for example, part 3, part 3 here, because part 2 is psyche, she calls it psyche, right, which is diet, and part 3 is sekhem in Egyptian esoteric teaching, and sekhem means spiritual wisdom. Okay, so when spiritual wisdom is moving through your diet, so that's why I'm saying it's like Kundalini energy, right? You awaken and you have access to the source, right? And then you become one with pneuma or pneuma. And pneuma, it's quite interesting. Pneuma by the Stoics was called the life force, which is exactly the name for the energy, for Kundalini energy. So basically you're one with the life force, which is the energy, Kundalini energy. So I say it's quite complex, and I probably could explain it better because it's just so many overlaps. But as I say, I'm just working myself through this material. So basically this one is wrong. First one is wrong identification. The second one is psyche or diet, or psyche or diet, which is the Osiris' spine, which is the channel through which energy can move, but there are too many obstacles because we all have stuff, right, from childhood and from past lives. The third one is sekhem, according to Egyptian esoterica. So a sekhem is actually spiritual force that is moving through us. That's why I think it's correspondent to Kundalini energy. And the fourth one is, pneuma, which is cosmic consciousness, but this is your oneness with the life force, basically, which is also another name for Kundalini energy.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, for those of you who are jumping in the chat, I know Vance is answering, but if you're just on audio, Joanna is doing a great job of showing us the sort of Kundalini ascension powers that you find in the Gospel of Mary that are associated and parallel with traditional, esoteric Egyptian mysticism, and also parallel Eastern esotericism. So that's what we're doing. Yeah, I think it makes perfect sense. I mean, talk about a lot of imposter syndrome that this stuff takes care of, right? You're not good enough. You should have done it. You should have this. Yes.
But
the voices in our head.
That's right, the voices in our head. And also, it's just I would add that going back to esoteric Egypt, what I learned from these people, it is that exactly the temples, there are lots of representations of upright serpent, which represents Kundalini energy in esoteric traditions, right? And they're often associated, with the trio, Isis, Osiris, and Horus, right? But it's a completely different talk because it is very complex. So there are these representations of serpent in major, especially in the temples of Karnak and so on, right, along the Nile. So this is lots of work. I think I really put myself into a situation here, but but I would tell you that like all esoteric works, whether I was reading esoteric tantra or the Gospel of Mary Magdalene now for 17 years or so, it is they nurture you and they challenge you. So it's not an easy reading. You really have to. I wonder.
I'm just putting some comments up. Feel free to address them or not.
Yeah, I could be. It could be. It's Bob. Absolutely, as Jacob's ladder, right? Because Jacob's ladder is really, it's like Kundalini moving through the earth, through Osiris's spine. Yeah. So it's basically just going back to esoteric Egyptian terminology. So Sekhem is moving through the earth. right?
Mhm.
Sekhem is moving through Osiris's spine, right? So I would say that I didn't think of it, but yes, excellent. Yeah, I would say so. Yes, in esoteric kind of explanation of it.
Yeah. If you have any questions you really want to address, please super chat them. And Vince, I have to let a little cat, a little that has to go to the little secum needs to go down the spine of going outside. So I'll be right back.
Okay.
But if you have a question or comment, take it away.
Yeah, I don't, but it seems like we're in we're at the end of the paragraph. What were you going to talk about next, Joanna?
No, I think I probably would like to finish with this because I think with the Gospel of Mary Magdalene actually ask us to look within, where you're not ready, so to speak, right? So, what are your unfulfilled desires? What is actually driving you? And either let it go, or do it if necessary, as long as it is not some, addiction that is destroying you, right? And then, allow the kind of force, the divine force within you to move through you, right? But this
Right.
is a kind of cooperation, like you have to cooperate because you say no, I resist or I don't believe it exists or something like that. Then the journey is much longer. So for example, one of my spiritual teachers said, how long is the path? The path is as long as your ignorance, he said, right? So because if
Right.
we have, yeah, if we have, right, all of these blocks within us and we don't work on them, and actually they sabotage us, right? And that's why the last point before we can actually join, so to speak, Christ consciousness, it is, a strong latent feelings and concepts, right? Like about ourselves and our own unworthiness. And I think that it is the institutionalized religions, but any governmental institutions and anybody, from external world, but especially institutionalized religions, are actually keeping us in the state of unworthiness, right? We
Yeah.
need some. Mhm.
Yeah, especially the ones that tell you, "Oh, you're sinful, you're bad, and
Yeah,
you have to make up for your sins, and mankind is, all original sin and all that type of thing." It's a good way to keep control, over
that's right.
people.
When here, it says like you work on this because actually you don't need more rules. That's the first part of the gospel, which is much easier to read,
Ah,
right?
right.
And there is no sin, that actually is hanging over you. So now I would like to return to this first part because when he says, it's just consequences of your actions. So of course, if you choose an action from wrong identification, it's not going to serve you, right? The same if you choose an action that comes from some kind of unfulfilled desire, unless you do it to fulfill this desire and get rid of this, it doesn't serve you. If you use an action, but anarchy is a beautiful thing against archonic domination. Absolutely, yes. So he basically teaches us.
I thought I'd throw up that up there.
Yeah, viva la France.
They're burning down the Black Rock building. I was like, yeah, go
Oh
French.
my goodness, yeah, it's quite intense there, right?
Yeah.
So so then from what, so practically speaking, because I know it's very esoteric, practically speaking, from what level of these four types of consciousness you're making your decisions? Okay, because even if you make it, you think that this is actually, I forgot to mention here because it's really important for part 4. Okay, when we talk about pneuma here, which is part 4, right? Is if you are making a decision, unless it's a very conscious decision, because you think that you're sacrificing yourself for someone else, but it comes actually from a sense of unworthiness,
Mm.
that doesn't serve your evolution. Unless you do kind of like a Christ moment, you sacrifice yourself for a greater cause and you make a conscious choice. That's different than like, I'm not worthy, so, right? So I would just sacrifice for someone else. So you are worthy, right? So this is what teaching you are worthy. Another example for the fourth one is because we all have, and I remember from one of our discussions in Inner Sanctum, we all have causes or situations in the world that break our hearts, right? Like some form of injustice or
Right.
and then I become like a Kali Durga, I just want to go for a kill. But then this is the latent wrong feeling or a concept. You cannot destroy evil with evil, right? So this is the last kind of anger that you have to get rid of, because you cannot transform the world through anger, so to speak, right? So this is also another latent kind of layover, latent garment, right, that she's talking about. So, and even Kali, Kali eventually surrendered to love, right? So this is basically this: whatever breaks your heart, absolutely it should be your cause. I tell my students this all the time, but you cannot be brought down to a lower level of consciousness, because you just feed the archons.
Mm-hmm.
And it is very difficult. And only by reading this gospel, I actually understood why Jesus let them crucify him, because the rest doesn't make story for me, historically or otherwise, right? Because this is just an example of what you're not hiding, but you're also not, you cannot fight evil with evil, so to speak, right? Mm-hmm. And you just transcend that. You have to just transcend this.
Yeah. What did Philip K. Dick say? To fight the empires, to be infected with its derangement.
Yeah, very good.
It appropriates you like a virus and just turns you into
correct.
Yeah.
So you descend. You don't ascend. You descend, and then you're one with and then you meet for the archons, right? Because they feed off your lower energies. They cannot, and I think this is perhaps what this means. A design has been erased by the virtue of a higher design, because they cannot feed off higher energies. Your energy is on a level that they cannot feed off, because they are stuck in these two energies. So basically, either you think that you're not worthy, or you have such strong desires that God, you would do anything for them, including selling your soul to the archons, right? So they can feed only of this. Another one is, you think that maybe you're doing right by serving the archons because you have to work with, with the evil to, improve society. You feed them as well. That's why the only way it is to transcend it, right? And it's the most difficult part of any spiritual practice.
Makes sense. Well said.
Okay, I'm sorry if it was really complex, but the Gospel of Mary is very complex. It's a very esoteric teaching, and I don't think I would have been able to read through this if I didn't go do like chapter 29 of the Tantras, which is like impossible to understand, and it took me 17 years to get to this point. So you have to be kind to me. But I just wanted to share, where I'm at this point here, because in my book We Are the Goddess, I write about the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, and in very basic terms, but I didn't know then, it was only a year ago, what I know now. So it's almost like thank you so much, Matea. It is almost like an appendix, right? That now maybe turn into another book, because I feel like I made a spiritual shortcut, but I didn't do it in my book. I didn't do it on purpose. I did it from what I understood then, right? So
the text is a secret, right?
The text is a secret.
And the secret, it could take you tomorrow. It could be 40 years.
That's right. And that reminds me, just as a good closure, thank you, Miguel, for helping me with this. It is that sacred texts, well, in my case, tantric texts or the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the more you give them energy, like I don't read them. Now I read it every day. But for many years, I didn't read now, right? Now and then, it actually has an initiatory power. And this is what all esoteric traditions say, whether it is esoteric Hinduism, or is it esoteric Egyptian tradition, or is it, Gnosticism or Hermetic traditions. They say that the text is the initiation. So people like to have an initiation and dress up like goddesses and gods, and and I went through an initiation, and it was really powerful for me. So I'm not joking about it. But then you have to take it from there. And the text itself is initiation, but it is initiation because it's so complex that it asks you, to commit to the text. And then you got the gift of initiation.
Agreed 100%. Yeah.
Thank you, Miguel. So you can take off the slide, because we have number 4 missing.
No problem. Yeah, it's been great. I actually have a surprise. I have a little presentation too. I want to share if you don't mind. I don't want to steal your thunder because
No. I have no thunder.
okay,
I just
just the snake.
I just have a upright serpent.
Yeah, I'll give an intro, but first, I guess the question people want to, or I want to ask, is somebody comes up to you and they say, "Well, who is Mary Magdalene?" Obviously, by now it's obviously that Magdalene is a city that appeared after she died, so she was
Not
never from
necessarily.
Magdalene. Really?
Not
Oh,
necessarily, because I actually write about it in the other goddess, but recent archaeological discoveries show that there was a settlement there.
when she
Okay,
was alive. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
but it doesn't have to mean, but I don't commit to either or, right? So,
Right, right.
and I like actually the European name and also Spanish name, Maria Magdalena, which I think is much nicer than Mary Magdalene, right? Maria Magdalena. So, Maria Magdalena, I'm saying because it just resonates with my soul. So, I personally, but it was also from the other goddess, I made a connection between her and Mary the alchemist, simply
No.
because, according to Zosimus, who is a third century historical figure who was an alchemist, and he said that Mary the Jewess or Mary the prophetess, who lived in Alexandria in the first century, she was teaching the teachings of ascension of the soul through alchemy. So she's teaching spiritual alchemy, not the gold stuff. How to turn
Right, right.
base metals. And in my opinion, when I was doing research, there was a group of spiritual teachers called Therapete, which lots of people talk about them right now because it was written in. Anyway, I'm not going to get into the details of this. I think everybody has a headache from me talking details, but they were living in Alexandria, right? And they were welcoming women who are spiritually gifted. So I make a thesis in the other goddess that Mary Magdalene went to Alexandria, and she quite possibly is Mary the alchemist, who is also a historical figure because it was confirmed. I confirmed in the Library of Israel that they even found some stuff and so on. So, and I don't see why not, because her gospel, which is also found in Egypt, teaches the ascension of the soul. Mary the alchemist was teaching the ascension of the soul, and Zosimus himself is from Panapolis, which is Akhmin. So I believe that
wow.
this is where Akhmin is. So he's basically Zosimus of Akhmin, except that in those times the place was called Panapolis. So there are this kind of tenuous but actually beautiful connections. So I personally think she was the alchemist, Mary the alchemist.
But you think she was originally from Palestine? She was a
There is an interesting, and I explored it also in the other goddess. That in some Hermetic traditions, which also came from Egypt, they claim that her father was Egyptian. Her father was Egyptian who married a Jewish woman. And that's why her kind of uncleanness, came from her fact that she's not pure Jewish woman. You understand? And also because she was a hybrid, and he apparently also was associated with the temple of Isis and so on, according to Hermetic sources from Egypt. And also Hermetic sources say that Magdala was actually place of lots of esoteric teachings that were not in agreement with whatever dominant form of Judaism was going on, and they had lots of connections with Egypt and so on, and it was kind of very a kind of heretical society, and that's why her uncleanness comes from both, because she came from a place that was like that. Her father was not Jewish but was Egyptian. Okay, so that's why she was, according to Hermetic sources, she was half and half.
But she was probably educated and well off.
Yeah, and absolutely educated and well off, yes. And even Catholic scholars such as Candida Moss, who is talking about Mary Magdalene, but she's also very orthodox.
Yeah.
So they try to make her, say that she was a woman of means, but because she doesn't want to have a sexy relationship with Jesus, she says, but she was probably an old woman who was supporting Jesus's movement, okay? So that's why he probably kissed her on a cheek, and not on a mouth, not on a breast, not on the neck.
Nobody
You know,
wants Jesus to get laid in this world.
yeah,
That's
nobody
the
wants to get
problem.
laid. And I said,
Everybody
go
makes
for it.
excuses.
Go
Yeah,
for it.
yeah.
Yeah, this is what we have
Have
got is
fun.
about. So definitely a woman and quite educated. And even the tradition that says that they went to France, that she went to France, as I said, 15 years after the crucifixion. So she had time in Alexandria. Even Starbird thinks that she went first to Alexandria.
Mm.
And from Alexandria only she went to France. They say, which is the golden egg legend, the golden legend that is, the French thing written by the Dominican who
All right.
collected all kinds of early information. They say that when she stepped out, in Marseille, everybody was amazed by her beauty. So no, sorry, not an old woman, and also, and also by her education and spiritual erudition, and
Mm.
they said that, and she came from a powerful family, which they believe that she was Mary of Bethany is the same, right?
Right.
Mary Magdalene, from a powerful family, and that's why she was used to, she was very vain as a young woman, although she was educated. But even in Middle Ages, until it got completely degraded, nobody thought, like she was the woman, that came from education, right? So only for the lower masses, because even the monks, this is written by the monk, Dominican monk. So only for like the masses, the plebus, the Roman plebus, like the bottom feeders, right? They were told, oh, she's a prostitute, and even a prostitute can get it redeemed, like you poor wretches, But the monks themselves did not believe it. They thought that she was a sister, of Martha and from Bethany. And the only reason why one is from Bethany and the other one is from from what is it, Mary Magdalene, from Magdala, it is because this is how the father divided the property. So he gave one to each. One to Lazarus was something, I forgot what, because I wasn't interested. To Mary, he left Bethany, and to her, he left Magdala. So this is what was believed by the very monks, but they didn't teach it to the masses, right?
Makes sense. Yeah, somebody on the chat was like, where's she getting all of this? So I just put that banner for all of you. And it's on the show notes right now, the link to Joanna's website and her book, The Other Goddess. And some of this will also be in a future work or in other
Yes.
content that she'll, but for knowing all about Mary, go to The Other Goddess.
Yes, so just to answer, yes, thank you. This is what I was just saying now. It's a long research and it's in The Other Goddess. But what I was saying about the Gospel of Mary, the slide, it's new stuff, right? So this one is not included in The Other Goddess. But what I'm saying now is all in The Other Goddess.
All right. Let's see. Corey, I think that's a simple yes.
Is the Gospel of Mary based in ancient Kemetic Egyptian principles of history? I would say so, yes, absolutely,
Yeah, definitely Alexandria, mysticism and magic and
yes,
all that which the Gnostics and the Hermetics drew from.
Yeah, and I mentioned for people who came later, I'm sorry, I mentioned that actually I was talking about here about, how we have to look at the Egyptian history from a different point of view, so to speak, right? They came as a very evolved civilization, and that's with very deep knowledge, which actually degraded with time, right? So
yeah, I mean, you have Plato and Pythagoras said everything we learn from the Egyptian mysteries. That we owe Greek civilization owes everything to the Gnosis of the Egyptians.
The greatest Greek minds say it, and they're banging at the doors of Egyptian temples. I forgot which one was, and he says, "Please take me. I want to know what you know." And they let him, like he was waiting for 3 years, eating little bugs and stuff. And they said, "Okay," So and then he came back to Greece, right? And so.
Yeah, this is powerful stuff. All right, well, yeah, okay. Let me. Where is it? What I did too. I went to Tome, which is an AI website that does the presentations for you. So I just simply put the title Egypt Sex Magic and it gave me a little presentation. It's okay. And then I added a few things. So I thought it'd be fun because, again, it was 10 minutes of work because I already had this paper on sex magic in Egypt. So it was some cut and cut and paste, but I think you guys will enjoy it, and we'll just run through it. There we go.
I close my notes.
Let me get my okay. Excuse me. All right, I called it Seduction and Sorcery, Unveiling the Erotic Secrets of Egypt. Okay, Introduction. Sexuality and magic were intertwined in ancient Egypt, where sex was considered a sacred act that could bring about powerful forces. The Egyptians believed that sexual energy could be harnessed to achieve spiritual enlightenment and magical powers. I think they're right so far.
Mhm.
That's the next slide. The role of sex in Egyptian religion. Yeah, and this IH gives me the graphics too. Sex
Mhm.
played a central role in Egyptian religion, particularly in the cults of the goddess Isis and Hathor. Both of these goddesses were associated with fertility, childbirth, and sexuality, and were often depicted as beautiful women with full breasts and hips. Oh, this AI must be male. Okay. Sexual practices in ancient Egypt. Sexual practices in ancient Egypt were diverse and varied, ranging from heterosexual intercourse to masturbation and same sex encounters. While some sexual acts were frowned upon, such as incest and bestiality, come on, others were celebrated as a way to honor the gods and achieve spiritual enlightenment. Magical spells and incantations. Magic was an important part of ancient Egyptian life, and many spells and incantations were used to harness sexual energies for various purposes. Some spells were designed to increase fertility or sexual potency, while others were used to protect against sexually transmitted disease or to ensure fidelity in relationships. The role of women in ancient Egyptian sexuality. Women played a significant role in ancient Egyptian sexuality and were often depicted as powerful and alluring figures. Many women held positions of authority and were respected for their sexual prowess, which was seen as a source of strength and vitality. Legacy of ancient Egyptian sexuality. The legacy of ancient Egyptian sexuality can still be felt today as many modern religions and spiritual practices continue to incorporate elements of sex and magic. The Egyptians' reverence for sexual energy as a source of power and enlightenment continues to inspire people around the world to explore the deeper mysteries of human sexuality. And this is me, cut and paste from Sex and Magic, Creation, Death, and Rebirth by Selena Madden. And it talks about examples. And here she says, a mysterious document named the Turin Papyrus, unearthed in the early 19th century in Deir el Medina, is still being researched. Part satirical and part sexual in its content, scholars debate the purpose of the papyrus. Pornography, social commentary, coded message to the gods? The theory of satire or social commentary arises because the illustrations are at times outrageous. While the women are young and beautiful, the men are grotesque with caricature style penises assuming impossible bodily positions. Got to get a hold of that. Uh, in the treasure of Tutankhamun, a clothing dresser was found depicting an image of the boy king drawing bow and arrow. Near his feet reclined his wife, and the word meaning to shoot, which has clear connotations with the image of archery. Further reflection determines this word also corresponds to ejaculate. Researchers have also unearthed love poetry expressing sensual feelings. One passage describes a woman as emerging from the waters of the Nile, clothing clinging to her body, her fingers like lotus petals, and in her thighs her beauty rests. Wow, this is like Bo Derek in that movie. Um, the myth of Osiris, Isis, and Seth clearly describes sex and phallic symbolism. Another spell relates to the love and faithfulness of Isis to Osiris. The male client would be instructed to anoint his penis with an anointment prepared for him by the magician. The act of engaging in intercourse with his lover while his penis was anointed would ensure she would be faithful to him, and any children she conceived would be his. As is common in magical workings, there was a caveat, for if she was already married to to her to her affections lay elsewhere, the result would be a hate towards him as Isis hated Set. So I think that's it. What do you think, Joanna? I think it was important because I wanted to show that sex and magic was very important. And as
Yes. Yeah.
scholars have said, it was important to the Gnostics. The Gnostics in Alexandria probably practiced their forms of this
Yeah.
sex, heck, and magic
Yeah.
thing.
The Nassins and the Paratics, especially, right? We talk about the serpent,
Yeah, the
and also,
Borborites, the
yeah,
Carpocratians.
and drinking sexual fluids to achieve the kingdom of God, which is actually pure esoteric tantra. But I also discuss in Via the Goddess in chapter 29 of Tantra Loka, right?
Right.
So, which is a Hindu document. So, what you were reading, I was thinking tantra, tantra,
Yeah,
tantra.
it's all there. Yeah.
So, because actually the descriptions of anointing, sexual organs for the purpose of expansion of consciousness and so on, it's actually pure tantra as well. So
Mm.
I think that what was actually Vance asking at the beginning, who got it from whom? Did the Egyptians get it from Indians, or Hindus, or Hindus got it from Egyptians? I think the answer is that it's probably more older than that. And that's why at the beginning I was saying that Egyptian civilization came intact, for what I learned from magical Egypt, also as a ready civilization. So we definitely had a different civilization that started it all, and it just spread one direction in India, one Sumer, one Egypt, and of course in Turkey, Göbekli Tepe, right, which is even more ancient, according to traditional archaeologists. So there was definitely pre-civilization that was lost, and and they brought also sexual means of ascension. But in this, and I wrote about it in the other goddess, but in this talk I was talking about what does Mary say about it, and could it be Kundalini energy moving through different centers?
No, makes
And
sense.
I wrote
And
your presentation. Cool,
oh,
cool.
thank you. Yeah, AI is yeah, it's a work in progress. Yeah, I did get Bard, Vance. I
Oh,
like
really?
ChatGPT better. Bard gets turns into just Google search a lot of times. But.
Yeah. Well, I wish it did. It sometimes it makes things up that you could find in Google search that Bart
Just
is wrong.
Yeah,
yeah. This one I actually double checked, and it was, but it again I had the paper, so I was able to double check.
yeah.
Some of it sounded like it was projecting modern concepts back into the past, though, to me. But maybe maybe it had sources that I'm not familiar with.
I think it's established because even, for example, the myths always really show how a culture started or believes. And of course, the myths are the myth of Atum, where this giant serpent, you already have the serpent who's the supreme
Mm,
being of the universe, and he
mm,
inseminates his mouth and throws a seed, and then the gods come out. So, yeah, and of course, the myth of Isis and Osiris and the dismemberment and the penis. So you can always tell the Egyptians are pretty cool about sex throughout
mm,
their dynasties. I mean, like the Greeks
mm,
started when you read like Hesiod's cosmology, or what did he call it, his big work.
mm.
And it starts out the gods are really out of control. I mean, Zeus is having sex with children.
Oh yeah.
Everybody's just
Okay, disgusting.
everybody's crazy. But as the story goes, it gets more and more conservative because in their mythology, okay, we're being wild in the golden age, but if we want to survive in these city states, these are
Yeah,
the roles we're going to have. But with the Egyptians, there's always sort of this very
yeah.
cool flow of magic and sex.
So I just, because I cannot help myself, if I can say that, the thing with Isis that I discussed also in the other goddess, and then she's having sex with basically Osiris's penis. The same story is repeated, in Tantra with Kali, basically resurrecting Shiva, by
Right.
riding him right on a battlefield, right? So this is the same story. There are just so many connections between Egyptian esoterica and Hindu esoterica.
I don't know about that story. Maybe you can expand Chester. And of course, you've got the story of Sekhmet, who's Kali.
Yeah,
Ra creates her to defeat these rebellious humans that are threatening
yeah,
the gods, but she goes crazy. starts killing everybody. But in that story, it's not the handsome Shiva. It's Ra has to give her some beer to calm her down,
Okay.
and she
But
passes out.
who says you cannot add a little bit to the myth, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
but the story is essentially, the core of the story is essentially the same, right?
right. Yeah, and it shows basically, yeah, the psyche and the values of a people.
Hmm.
And so, I mean, needless to say, you had this view of Kundalini and spiritual alchemy, and obviously, the whole Eros and Anima and Animus, that was just an ancient form of it. The church and the Romans too were pretty bad. If you can control this, you can control the
Yeah.
power of the people.
Yes.
Very simple. It's a very simple
Yes.
formula.
Yes, that's a very simple formula, and it's actually even. I don't want to start another topic, but in the Gospel of Philip, in a bridal chamber, they are saying kind of the same thing, but it's very sensual, So and they said that the child of a woman will resemble a man she loves. If it's her husband, it's her husband, but if she loves her lover, it will resemble her lover. Like there's no judgment, morality on Eros. You know what I mean? And we are talking about bridal chamber, which is basically used for sexual alchemy and ascension as well, right? So
No, it makes sense. Makes perfect sense. Well, awesome. Well, this has been a very cool conversation. The audio version will be out in a few days. Vance, do you have any last questions or comments?
Yeah, my one question is maybe a little bit tangential, but what do we know about the origin of the Gospel of Mary? Do we know when it was written, or do we know who wrote it?
Gos- Mhm. Gospel of Mary. Okay, so I just kind of try to cover it at the beginning. So we have these two papyri, one from Akhmin and one for Oxyricon. I think I'm pronouncing it properly, and the one from Oxyricon is older. It's written in Greek, and some people say it is the early second century, and some people so it's basically dated between 90 to 150 Common Era. So and there are some scholars that argue that there are so many that that it was probably written at the same time as the Gospel of John, but that it would be around 90, right?
No,
So it's between
Yeah.
90 to 150. However, for people who go against the Gnostic Gospels at all, they say, oh, the Gospel, the Berlin Papyrus, which is the one found in Akhmin, is 5th century, which is 400s, which it is. But they failed to mention that the earlier one, they found the earlier one, which is called the Reinhold papyrus from Oxyrus, which is dated much earlier, and also because of linguistic analysis, we know that it's probably also not the original one.
Right.
Because
I was
it
going
has
to
some,
ask about that copy. Sometimes the scribes copy it over the
yeah,
years because they
yeah,
get worn
and
out or
it
whatever.
contains some kind of things that linguists would know that it's obviously they copied from an early manuscript because it is kind of different phrasing or something, right?
How about the author? Do we have any attributions for who might have who might have written it?
No, but we don't have any attributions. Well, attributions in the name of Mary, right? But then there is attributions like all of the gospels in the Bible, right? Like basically,
Yeah.
did John write the Gospel of John? Did Matthew write? We don't know. There are theories flying around, right? So, but it suggests that there was some community, that. Especially in this area of Akhmin, right, and along Nile, that somehow, venerated this idea of Mary Magdalene and so on. So this is all we know. We don't know anything about it the way we don't know about the Bible as well.
Right.
But I think 90 to 150 is pretty early, I would say, right?
Thanks.
Awesome. Awesome. Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, for the audience, look at the show notes, get Joanna's book, The Other Goddess, or go to joannakuyaba.com. Again, you'll find it on the show notes. And there's a lot of other good stuff. You can find her blogs and other information. And yes, please support this show. Please support alternative podcasters and streamers. And again, Chester, thank you for the super chat. And I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Pink wasn't well. He stayed back at the hotel. I just had to quote that song. But Joanna, as always, thank you very much for
Thank you.
coming. Always good to have you here.
Thank you. And again, apologies if it wasn't, I'm still working my stuff, way through the stuff, right? So I share what I know at the moment.
No, this is great. Anytime you want to share, let's do it. Again, it's a living thing. The text is a secret. The podcast is a secret, maybe too. And Vance, thanks for keeping us company too.
Oh, it was great to learn about the Gospel of Mary. I didn't realize so much cool stuff was hidden within it.
Yeah, and this is a gospel that we don't even have. We're missing about half of it.
Yeah,
Imagine
Wow.
that's
the
right.
other half. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
mean, you never know. It could be just Mary's taco salad recipe for Jesus. So hopefully it's more than that, but we shall see. But anyway, thank you guys for being here, for being yourself here in the desert of the real. For those of you who celebrate, have a good holiday weekend and celebrate what you need to celebrate. We respect that. And take care. We'll see you, some of you, tomorrow for our other AB Live. And as I always say, write your own gospel, live your own myth. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Jen.